Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast. Good morning. It's Thursday, the 11th of September. I'm Caroline Hepker in London.
And I'm Stephen Carroll in Brussels. Coming up today, police in Utah are searching for the killer of Charlie Kirk, a conservative activist and close ally of US President Donald Trump.
I think the world of you. Bloomberg obtains revealing and embarrassing emails between Britain's ambassador to the US, Peter Mandelson, and Jeffrey Epstein.
Plus, seeking support, Poland calls on NATO allies to bolster its air defences after Russian drones were shot down over its territory.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
A search is underway in the United States for the killer of conservative activist Charlie Kirk, who was shot dead at a university in Utah. Kirk, a close ally of the US president, was speaking at an outdoor event when police say a single shot was fired from a nearby building. Donald Trump reacted to the killing on social media.
For years, those on the radical left have compared wonderful Americans like Charlie to Nazis and the world's worst mass murderers and criminals. This kind of rhetoric is directly responsible for the terrorism that we're seeing in our country today, and it must stop right now.
It's the US President Donald Trump. Kirk was one of America's most prominent conservative figures, leading the organisation Turning Point USA. His popularity had flourished using a brash approach to politics and as an online champion of Trump and his MAGA movement. The shooting is the latest in a spate of US political violence. Donald Trump faced 2 assassination attempts on the campaign trail, and in June a gunman killed Minnesota legislator Melissa Hortman and her husband at their home.
Bloomberg News has obtained more than 100 previously unreported emails between Jeffrey Epstein and Peter Mandelson between 2005 and 2010. The interactions between the UK's current ambassador to the US and the late disgraced financier cast a new light on their relationship, showing that it was deeper than previously known. Bloomberg's Chris Pitt has more.
The day before Jeffrey Epstein reported to a Florida jail in June 2008 to begin serving time for soliciting sex from a minor, he received an outraged message from a friend, anguished at the injustice of it all. "I think the world of you, and I feel hopeless and furious about what has happened," Peter Mandelson wrote in an email obtained by Bloomberg News. "I still can barely understand it. It just could not happen in Britain." At the time, Mandelson was European Commissioner for Trade. Today, he is the UK's ambassador in Washington. The new revelations come as Mandelson already finds himself at the centre of a furore over his links to the serial sex abuser, after the publication this week of a 2003 birthday book in which he penned a 10-page tribute calling Epstein his best pal. Bloomberg sent Mandelson a detailed letter outlining the emails on Monday this week. Mandelson acknowledged receipt of Bloomberg's questions, but has not responded to them. However, in an interview with the UK newspaper The Sun on Wednesday morning, he expressed remorse at his relationship with Epstein.
"I regret very much indeed. I felt it like an albatross around my neck since his death in 2018 or 19 when it was. I feel a tremendous sense of regret, not only that I met him in the first place, but that I continued the association."
Despite those comments on the Harry Cole Saves the West podcast, the UK's Prime Minister Keir Starmer now faces growing calls to sack Mandelson as ambassador to the US. Conservative opposition leader Kemi Badenoch called the situation a disgrace. In London, Chris Pitt, Bloomberg Radio.
Stands that Poland has asked NATO allies for more air defence systems after shooting down Russian drones that crossed its border yesterday. Warsaw has invoked Article 4 of the alliance's treaty, triggering consultations that could lead to coordinated action. Poland's Foreign Minister Radoslaw Sikorski says that they need Patriot missiles and new technology to protect their skies.
We need to create what Ursula von der Leyen called today in the European Parliament at her annual State of the Union address, a drone wall. This is a threat not only to Poland. This new technology of the mass use of drones is a threat to all of the EU and NATO, and we need to face it together.
Polish Foreign Minister was speaking as Prime Minister Donald Tusk said in a social media post that Poland had received proposals of concrete support from allies. Polish and Dutch jets were scrambled to shoot down the drones yesterday early morning. 19 airspace violations were registered.
Mexico is planning to impose tariffs of up to 50% on cars and other products made by China and several Asian exporters. The levies would apply to thousands of categories of goods, from auto parts to steel to furniture, and would most affect countries with which Mexico has no trade deal. The Mexican Economy Minister, Marcelo Ebrard, described the proposed duties as part of efforts to protect jobs and industry. It's a move that would more closely align Mexico with US protectionism as President Claudia Sheinbaum prepares for talks over North America's free trade deal.
The CEO of Citigroup, Jane Fraser, says she is surprised by the upside resilience of the US economy amid a constantly evolving macroeconomic landscape. Speaking to Bloomberg, she said businesses now have more clarity on tax policy, tariffs and deregulation.
One is always surprised by the upside and the resiliency of the US. So let's look at what's gone on. Is you've got to look at the collective impact of the tax policy, what's been happening with tariffs, and indeed the increasing deregulation that we're seeing. And they work together as a package. I think the most important piece for a corporate, clarity. We hate uncertainty. We like clarity. And our client base now is really starting to act with more confidence.
Jane Fraser's position contrasts, though, with the CEO of UBS, Sergio Ermotti. He told Bloomberg that the impact of global tariffs on the US economy remains unclear.
The true issue on tariffs will be seen on consumers. In the US, we will need to see exactly if there is an inflationary aspect of tariffs. And
is that still unclear at this point?
I think it's unclear.
Comments from two of the world's most prominent bank CEOs comes ahead of today's US CPI data, which is expected to show a 0.3% month-on-month price rise, as investors have fully priced in a quarter-point rate cut at the Federal Reserve's meeting next week.
The European Central Bank is expected to leave interest rates unchanged at its decision today, as economists believe that policymakers are finished with cuts for now. Bloomberg's Michal Kubala reports.
All 59 economists in Bloomberg's survey predict the ECB will hold its deposit rate at 2% today. They're also expecting that fresh quarterly projections from the central bank should calm fears that inflation could sink below the bank's 2% target for too long. Most ECB officials are said to be happy with the current monetary policy stance. Prices are deemed to meet the target, and the euro area economy appears resilient, even as Donald Trump's tariffs take hold and France wrestles with political turmoil. In Brussels, Michal Kubala, Bloomberg Radio.
And those are your top stories on the markets. We're looking at the MSCI Asia Pacific Index, slightly weaker this morning. The Nikkei in Tokyo is up by 0.7%, though, and Chinese shares are doing well. The Shanghai Composite up by 1.2%, CSI 300 1.9% higher this morning. Euro Stoxx 50 futures a touch softer, and Nasdaq futures are also flat after yesterday's trading session saw the S&P 500 finish at another record high. On the currency markets, Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index a little stronger. The euro is trading just shy of 117 against the dollar.
Well, an incredible run for Wall Street that we've been following, but also, of course, that was partly with Oracle, the software company, and its results upbeat forecast. The shares yesterday closed up, Stephen, 36%. That means $89 billion added to the fortune of the co-founder and chairman, Larry Ellison, which is an incredible sum.
Yeah, it certainly is. I mean, it's been a long road for Larry Ellison, we should say, though. The company went through the 1990s dot-com cycle. Its stock price fell by over 80% after the bubble burst in 2000, and it took decades for Oracle's share price to recover. It hasn't been the shiniest of tech companies in a world where we've been talking about some of the others leading as well. But it does raise an interesting question about how these companies are valued, and that's something that Sheila Wren from Bloomberg Opinion's been writing about this morning as well, about how it's getting more difficult to determine the fair value of a tech company. There are no good answers when artificial intelligence is rapidly altering the investment landscape. She says you can read her piece at bloomberg.com/opinion.
Now, in just a moment, we're going to bring you the latest on those Polish calls for more air defences after yesterday's Russian drone incursions. But we want to get more now on the shooting of the American political activist Charlie Kirk in Utah. Bloomberg's Tiwa Adebayo is with us with more. This is a major event in America. What do we know actually about what happened?
Well, Kirk was at Utah Valley University as part of his political advocacy group, Turning Point USA. They were on what he's called the American Comeback Tour. He was scheduled to set up a table called Prove Me Wrong, where the audience attempts to stump the pundit. That's something he's known widely for online. And at that event where the shooting took place, there were more than 3,000 people present, according to the university's police chief. There were also 6 local police officers alongside Kirk's own security detail. And just 20 minutes after that event started, authorities say a single shot was fired at Kirk from a building about 200 yards away. He had actually just begun answering a question on the number of mass shooters in America over the last decade at the time the shooting took place. He was then driven to a local hospital where he later died, according to police. And so far, we know that CCTV from the event shows a person dressed in dark clothing, which is believed to be the suspect. FBI Director Kash Patel actually said in a social media post that a person of interest was taken into custody and later released. So currently the search is still underway.
Tiwa, tell us a bit more about Charlie Kirk. Do we know why he may have been targeted?
Well, Charlie Kirk was really best known for his work as executive director of that advocacy group, Turning Point USA. He founded that in 2012. It was funded by powerful conservatives. And really the hallmark of his work was youth engagement, which took him to university campuses all over the world. We mentioned earlier that trademark Prove Me Wrong event. He also took part in that very recently in the UK, in the University of Cambridge's Union Society in May 2025. That video of that debate amassed millions of views on YouTube, and these debates often went viral on social media, and a big part of his notoriety. We should mention that he was also known at times for his controversial politics and statements, including a criticism of Martin Luther King and other heavily questioned claims. But his work in politics really started well before Turning Point's foundation. He began advocacy in high school. Notably, he wrote a now famous 2012 essay for Breitbart News about liberal bias in economic textbooks, and that earned him media attention from channels like Fox Business, as well as speaking engagements around the country. And that theme of what he regarded as exposing and correcting liberal bias continued throughout his career. He later dropped out of college to found Turning Point USA, and that welcomed conservative students who were eager to prove liberal bias on college campuses. The organisation was huge. It had more than 800 college chapters, according to its website, and also financially quite successful. Tax filings from 2024 show that it grossed nearly $85 million in revenue. But really, over the last decade, something that he's been defined by is how instrumental he became to the MAGA movement. He had notoriously close ties to President Trump, illustrated by the lengthy video that the president posted to Truth Social eulogizing him following this incident. In terms of the reasons why he may have been targeted, we don't yet know anything about the motivations behind this crime, but the Utah Governor Spencer Cox has described it as a political assassination, as many others have done on the internet this morning.
Indeed, yeah. And President Trump talking about how his legacy would live on, his message would live on. What has been the reaction to his killing?
Well, there's been widespread condemnation actually across the political spectrum in the US. You mentioned Donald Trump. He released that 4-minute video on his Truth Social account in which he described being filled with grief and anger. And he described Kirk as a patriot and a martyr for truth and freedom. We've also seen statements, though, from those on the Democratic side. Both former presidents Joe Biden and Barack Obama have offered their sympathies to Charlie's family, his wife Erica, and 2 young young children that he leaves behind. We also heard from Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom, who actually hosted Kirk as the first guest on his own podcast. He's called this killing disgusting and vile. There have been renewed calls for a stop to political violence in the US. There has been a spate of incidents in the past year and recent months, but really from the Republican Party, we've seen widespread praise as well for Charlie Kirk. He's been called a beacon for millions of young Americans and an irreplaceable figure, and no doubt reactions will continue as the morning carries on.
Okay, Tiwa Adebayo, thank you very much. Stay with us. More from Bloomberg Daybreak Europe coming up after this.
Now, Poland has asked its NATO allies for additional air defence systems after it shot down Russian drones that crossed into its territory from Ukraine yesterday. Tony Halpin, who leads our team covering Russia's economy and government, joins us now for more on this. Good morning, Tony. What has Poland asked NATO for exactly?
Good morning. Well, it's looking for what the Foreign Minister Raslav Sikorski called an anti-drone wall. Basically, it's looking for help with things like anti-drone technology, which intercepts signals to bring down these aircraft, and things like Patriot missiles to bolster air defences alongside more air support, essentially to ensure that the border and airspace around Poland is more secure.
When we think about the reaction to this, we've heard from Poland's Prime Minister calling it an act of aggression. Do we know if these drones were sent intentionally or had crossed over the border by accident?
Yes, I mean, there's still quite a bit of debate about this within NATO. Some officials have been very blunt in saying that this was an intentional act by Moscow. Others have been more cautious, describing it as reckless, whether or not it was intentional. The fact from their point of view is that this was a large-scale incursion, 19 drones. So it's hard to make it look like it was accidental, particularly as they came from two different directions, from over Ukraine and from over Belarus. But so far, at least, Poland has been among the most vocal in calling it an act of aggression and an intentional act. And that's one of the things that NATO allies are busy assessing at the moment, just how deliberate this was.
What has Russia said about it all?
Well, there's been a fairly vague denial from the Russian Defense Ministry, essentially saying that the range of these drones wasn't sufficient, but that it was ready to carry out what it called consultations with Polish officials about the incident. The Kremlin itself has said nothing at all. So it's fairly vague from the Russian viewpoint. But again, as I said, there are 19 drones and it's hard to explain that number. But more will be expected to be explained, at least from the NATO side of Moscow. So far, they're being fairly tight-lipped.
Tony, with your experience covering Russia, does this look like an escalation from Moscow towards NATO?
Well, it's the most serious incursion into NATO airspace since the war in Ukraine began. And many within NATO have been fearful of the fact that at some point, President Putin of Moscow would seek to test NATO and to test its responses, partly to demonstrate that in some ways the defence alliance might be something of a paper tiger and that the commitment of Article 5 mutual defence wasn't really there. And one of the things that NATO allies in Europe are particularly waiting for is a response from the US President Donald Trump, apart from a very vague "here we go" message on social media. He has yet really to comment on this.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.